Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Fusion Strike, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, we are going to be looking at the flagship V-Star Pokemon coming out in our Brilliant Stars set. Arceus V-Star seems to be an extremely playable card and will be warping the meta around it. I believe there could be a number of potential Arceus-style decks that are going to be sitting around the Tier 1 mark. So it's definitely worth discussing, and how we can best play this card is a whole discussion in itself, because Arceus is a colourless type Pokemon with entirely colourless attack costs and has a universally helpful V-Star power, which means you can slot an Arceus V-Star package reasonably into more or less anything, which straight away opens the doors for a ton of interesting deck building decisions. And yeah, with just a few includes in your list, you can really make the most out of this Arceus V-Star. Quick look at the V, because it's certainly relevant to look over this Pokemon. Trinity Charge for 2 colourless energy, so just the attachment of a double turbo, or if you have some shenanigans in your deck, maybe you're playing Melanie, maybe you're playing something like Galarian Moltres E-Switch and manual attachment of basic energy, you can actually use this Trinity Charge attack, and you can go ahead and search your deck for 3 basic energy and attach them to your V in any way that you like. So if you're the player going second, straight away you give yourself a huge consistency boost by being able to power up basically 2 attackers, because you've got 2 energies onto your active V, and you're also able to Trinity Charge around onto other V Pokemon, be it other Arceus or other V Pokemon that you've already got into play. So even if your active Pokemon gets knocked out, and we know how fast and aggressive the metagame is, you're going to be giving up those 2 prizes, but at least you have another threat powered up immediately, provided you are able to ball search out another Pokemon, which you probably are doing. So yeah, Trinity Charge, although it doesn't put much pressure on, it is able to at least keep you in the game pretty easily just by finding a double turbo or one of these combos, which is already like a huge tick in the direction of Arceus for at least getting into the game and not just losing flat out to early aggression that some decks can put out. As we know, Mew is one of the best in the business at doing that right now in the format, but even things like Single Strike, because they have Umbreon, they can easily gust up 2 prize Pokemon and knock them out no problem. So being able to have energy around multiple threats is fantastic from the get-go. Power Edge is also an option for 3 energy. So again, this is only really open to you if you hit that double turbo energy, and then in this instance, it would also require energy acceleration, so the likes of Melanie, to get this rolling, and it can knock out a 1 prizer, which is again decent, especially for prize racing, things like Mew, where they sometimes will put themselves with a Meloetta in the active position, so having some early game pressure as a threat is a big upside. So already you want to be looking at things like Melanie just because of Power Edge in its own right. So that is something worth noting. And then jumping over to the V-Star, which is the real selling point, although the V is obviously very good, you become a 280 hit point 2 prize Pokemon, which already is just like a lot of meat to get through for a lot of archetypes. It forces, you know, their biggest attackers, damage mods coming in there on top as well to get KOs. And it has the attack Trinity Nova, which is a huge upgrade from the V, where you're still able to search those 3 basic energies and attach them to your Vs in any way that you like, but this time you're slapping 200 damage into the opponent. If you are using double turbo energy, that does drop down to 180, which is still good enough to knock out Mew, which is nice, Crobats and Luminions as well, which is pretty good. But you can also choice belt your way back up to 210, which is then covering a lot wider branch of V Pokemon in general, and if you are adding in things like Zigzagoon as well, you cover the majority of V Pokemon, which is really, really good. So Trinity Nova, solid damage output, especially when you stitch on the fact that you have this V-Star Power Starbirth, which allows you to search your deck for any 2 cards and put them immediately into your hand. So you actually, you know, pop off on turn 2 as soon as you find this V-Star and use the V-Star power, if that's your intention to use it on turn 2, which from my testing so far with Arceus, I would say like probably 80% of the time you're using Starbirth straight away. Because tempo is such a big element of the Pokemon TCG, that guaranteeing the optimal like turn 2 is just such incredible value that it's hard to pass up on. It's only really those times where your hand has already high rolled you to a point where you don't need the Starbirth, which is pretty rare. But typically, either this is helping you stitch together your attack by grabbing cards like Turbo Energy Guaranteed. Boss's Orders is always a big one as well, because you can grab Energy Boss or like Choice Belt Boss, anything that you need in that instance. It can guarantee that you have a V Pokemon on the board as well to attach up to with Trinity Nova. So it all supports Arceus and making sure that you have an excellent turn 2. And also, because you're attaching these energies, it means, again, that you have these multiple threats developed, so that even if Arceus is knocked out, you have a backup secured ready. So not only is your turn 2 amazing, but your turn 3 is probably amazing as well. And Pokemon at the moment is basically like a 4-turn game in most situations. So guaranteeing an excellent turn 2 and a pretty much sorted turn 3 is just insane. So Arceus, pretty low on the tempo side, but very, very good at ensuring that you are carrying on with attackers the entire game, just like we saw with ADP and with Pikarom, getting energies on multiple threats and just removing that issue where you can whiff the following turn is just so good. And it means that you are then able to play a variety of attackers in here because you have acceleration all through your consistency, which is, Starbirth, which then attacks, which then powers up your Pokemon on the bench. So even if your bench Pokemon are getting knocked out, you at least have the Arceus that can come back in and use Trinity Nova all over again, finish off some VMAXs that you've attacked into, or continue to gust around and take 2 and 1 prize Pokemon to improve your prize map, all the while still attaching energy from the deck. So things we need to note when we are looking at an Arceus package, you're probably playing 4 Ultra Ball, 4 Quick Ball, maybe some Incense in here as well, just so you can get into your V-Star. You're likely playing a number of Turbo Energy, although it doesn't have to be 4 copies. 4 copies improves your Trinity Charge odds, of course, of being like a good attacking option. That is to say, if you don't have other V Pokemon or 1 prize Pokemon that can put early pressure on into the active position in terms of damage, the Turbo Energy is going to be useful here, but that's not to say that you can't just slap in like 1 or 2 Turbo Energies and try and Starbirth into them to just go ahead and Trinity Nova straight away and have Arceus more on sort of like the tech package where it's like a thinner line potentially or less often attacking. And then you're likely going to play Choice Bet as well. Naturally, this is just a good card in most decks, but it improves Arceus as a potential attacker as well. So really, it's really non-invasive. You don't need many cards in your deck to make this good. And the good news is, like, Ultra Ball's already a really good card, Choice Bet is already a really good card, and it enables some other Pokemon to be more useful in the deck as well. Just having 4 Quick 4 Ultra means you can play things like Crobat and Luminion much more effectively, which again are consistency boosters and draw you cards throughout the game, which again is just a godsend. So it's very easy to fit Arceus. It grants you immediate value and it can continue into the mid game as well, especially if you are Arceusing to another Arceus, then you're churning out the Trinity Nova, making sure that you have attacking threats all over the place. So now that I've discussed Arceus and why it's just such a crazy card, let's start talking about the best partners for Arceus. And we'll start off with the basic shell of like, this could just be a good enough card on its own. It's a big 2 prize Pokemon. How can we make the most of this? And in this list, we're just saying a little bit of extra damage mod here and there from some quick shooting can help out dealing with, things like Cape of Toughness or Big Charm on 2 prize Pokemon, which could be pretty pesky for you, or just setting up damage into, opposing V-Stars, for example, which could be pretty decent. You have an inbuilt 1 prize attacker, which could be the Aqua Bullet from Shady Dealings Inteleon, which isn't too bad for you. You're putting in Path to the Peaks, which is very good for Arceus mirror matches. If you're the one to evolve first and path them, that could just, deny their Starbirth. Then you've been able to hit into them and block out their option to search their deck for whatever they want is a really big deal. You have Sharon's Care, which is a new healing card from the set. This is where you're going to try and gain your advantages just by being a chunky 2-prizer with your backup Inteleon engine for once you've used your Starbirth and helping you get into Starbirth in the first place, because Shady Dealings can get you into Incense, can get you into the Starbirth for then anything that you want. So this is like the vanilla shell of Arceus. Not many tricks in here at all. You are playing Melanie because A, it helps you attack with Inteleon because you have Raihan in the deck, but also it means that you have the Melanie option to actually use the first attack on the V much more reliably by either going Melanie attach if you're the player going second, obviously because that's when you want to attack, or if you go double turbo Melanie, you can hit that 130, which can again set up a VMAX for you, or it can take a 1 prize on the likes of Meloetta and whatnot, or Sobbles or Houndours, anything that gets shoved in the active from the player going first, or is stuck in the active, whatever. You can take a tempo prize knowing that you can always reload with a Starbirth into Melanie double turbo or Raihan double turbo and continue the pressure that way. So very streamlined Arceus. We know that the Inteleon engine is good. It's not a bad base to start from at all. You have some disruption in here, and ultimately you're just a deck that draws very well, retains its attackers very well, and you're not giving up easy prizes anywhere on the board either. Getting a bit more creative with the Arceus deck now, still incorporating that Inteleon package, but taking out some of those disruption cards, taking out the healing of Sharon, taking out those paths, and going for a more aggressive dark approach in here to tackle not only Mew, but also having the late game damage output of Malevolent Charge, as we've seen from the Ross Cawthorn deck, is just a really good late game beat stick. Once you force your opponent to go through a couple 2-prize Pokemon, suddenly you're in that range of like 250. The choice belt gets you up to like 300, the 250 plus the 20 base. So choice belt gets you into that 300 range. You have quick shooting in here as well, so you can finish Pokemon off pretty easily, not only the ones that are weak to dark, but of course improving your Mew matchup is never a bad thing. Adding in the Galarian Moltres is a nice peace of mind as well. Now that you no longer have Melanie to help you get powered up, you have Energy Switch plus Double Turbo as a combination here. If you can use Dire Flame Wings, and you still have the Raihan option, and actually from a 0 energy board even, you can Dire Flame Wings plus Attach plus Raihan to reply against some Pokemon which are being aggressive into you. We're turning into Training Courts, which I think is really, really good with a lot of Arceus builds. It's usually you're going to be seeing the likes of Path to the Peak, Collapse Stadium, and Training Courts. And I think if you're playing multiple energy, or if you are playing Galarian Moltres in particular, Training Court feels really good in the deck. So I've really enjoyed playing this as a Stadium card. And yeah, again, you have that Intel engine to see you through that sort of mid-game after you've had the power spike of Starbirth, and it means you can shady deal for the specific cards like Clara in the late game, which can feel pretty good. So yeah, adding in the Dark-type package is going to be something very popular because, of course, everyone's expecting to try and have a good time against Mew going into the new format. And now we're going to shift away from Inteleon quickly to look at some other Dark-type packages. This time we're going to be adding in Umbreon VMAX. And you can see we've stripped away all the single-prize Pokemon. We're going to try and play a 2- and 3-prize game in this instance, where you're not damaging your own Umbreons with Houndoom in this case. You're powering them up manually via the Trinity Nova. 310 is a decent size hit points to get through for Mew. And we're hoping that sometimes the Umbreons are going to come in here and give you that type advantage. There's still a Moltres E-Switch package in here, but it's made way a little bit for the Umbreons. You have additional gusting outs, of course, via the Dark Signal, which is nice. It opens you up to play other supporter cards on the turn and not be forced to boss all over the place. You're playing Moltres, you're playing Hooper as well, which gives you Dark and Psychic typing, which gives you some coverage against Rapid and Single Strike, although the matchup isn't necessarily easy for you, Arceus being weak to fighting, of course, making it a bit of a liability. We're actually playing Zapdos in here as well, and I really like a small Zapdos package in a lot of my Arceus decks, just because I'm respecting Arceus a lot. I'm expecting it a lot in tournaments, and I want to have Zapdos coming in and kicking Arceus for 1 attachment. That seems like good value. Because it's got a higher hit point threshold, and this deck specifically has a lower damage cap compared to some of the other ones that we see here. You're really trying to capitalize on 3 different weaknesses that we're playing in the deck in the Dark, Psychic, and the Fighting here as well. So that's really the idea and the intention of this kind of build. You're putting on a lot of pressure with Gusting, following that up with the Umbreon, much more reliably than a lot of the other Arceus builds, where sometimes you need to already have the Arceus in hand to be able to Starburst plus Starbirth into boss, whereas this way around you can research, then hit the Arceus, then go ahead and search out the Umbreon, or vice versa. It gives you a bit more leeway in the list here. The sort of downside is that you're all 2- and 3-prize Pokemon, and your opponent can take advantage of that map, and you have a lower damage output, I should say, and you're hoping to hit for weaknesses all over the place. But still a pretty interesting one, low to the ground, gets rolling pretty consistently, and is pretty decent overall. Going even lower to the ground and stripping away the Umbreon package, this is just a pure Dark package, which I think has been doing pretty well for me so far, just because of its simplicity, really. Because we are mostly 2-prize Pokemon, I have thrown some single prizes in here. Hooper giving you an Assault Gate 90 damage option, which is really good at putting some damage into VMAXs, or Vs that will evolve into VMAXs, which is really nice, especially with Choice Belt coming in here as well. That 120 could be a huge damage output swing to get them in range of a Trinity Nova, which is very cool. But also Mew for that Mysterious Tail, giving you some extra consistency throughout the game. It's a 1-prizer, so your opponent is basically incentivized to ignore it the entire game, but it gives you additional value just to hit these ball search outs in the openings, so you don't whiff like double Arceus, for example, especially if you're the player going second. and it also gets you into some of these interesting switch outs and whatnot, and it can save your Starbirth a card here and there, and it means you can prioritize things like Boss and Double Turbo that little bit more often, which is cool. Not too many tricks here, again, just trying to make the most out of those 3 weaknesses. The difference between this list and the one that you saw last is that you now have a 1-prize attacking option which can pressurize fellow 1-prizes, or set up, VMAXs as well. Ones that aren't getting hit for weakness, for example. So that's pretty important, and it gives you a different direction here in terms of tempo, but still trying to do a very similar thing in terms of targeting some of the bigger weaknesses in the game. Some other interesting builds, still low to the ground, very similar to the one that you've just seen, still liking Zapdos, this time having Flygon V as a beat stick in the deck, this time not hitting for weakness, but just having Dragon Impulse, which can do 320 damage into V maxes. In general, it's just a huge output, and you don't have to care about weakness so much here, which is really cool. One thing I actually really like, and has incentivized me to add Zigzagoon in the list, is that now that you go all the way up to 5 basic fighting energy, Zapdos with Choice Belt and Zigzagoon can actually KO Mew, and it actually comes off pretty often to start a race in that matchup. They, of course, do have resistance, so you need the Choice Belt and the Zigzagoon to pull off the play, but you do play a lot of Ball Search and 3 Choice Belt and Mew that can sometimes help you get there. You have Crobat Digging as well. So Zapdos actually can kick off the game for you pretty consistently if people overbench V Pokemon. And I think more and more often I'm seeing Crobats coming down, Luminions coming down, multiple Vs coming down on those opening turns. So it's not unrealistic to expect 2 Thunderous Kick turn 1. And this could also be really big in the mirror. To initiate that race, because you're mostly in mirror playing into lots of 2-prize Pokemon. So having the Zapdos much more open in this build is pretty tempting. And then we have the Shaymin VSTAR actually being that grass element, because you're already playing grass energy for Flygon, to be a late game beat stick as well, where you have the Revenge Burst. And we are mostly giving up 4 prizes, which puts you Choice Belt away from 310, which isn't bad at all. And you also have Zigzagoon in here as well. You could even think about having Scoop Up Net to improve Shaymin's numbers even more. So something worth bearing in mind. Or if you do force that 1 prize in the opening, you leave a Mew active as the player going first or whatever, and they take that 1 prize just to start the race. The Shaymin V gets even more dangerous. And the good news is that it only takes that 2 energy to get the Shaymin rolling, so if people are targeting things like Flygon, because they're such enormous threats on the bench, you can just do a right-hand attach play with the Shaymin, and it's basically doing the same thing as a Flygon as you get to the mid to late game. So some interesting, not really caring about typing here, this is more general, just like we can hit high damage, but it gives you the upside of having early Zapdos pressure, which is kind of cool. Into Fire then, I've seen a decent amount of lists looking at Charizard and actually seeing a lot of the the VSTAR being combined with Arceus, but I really don't think it makes sense. When Starbirth is such an incredible VSTAR power, I basically never see myself wanting to use Charizard's VSTAR ability, its attack, because you've had to already use Arceus just to get into the game. So unlike some of the lists you've seen previously, I imagine this is heavily weighted towards the Arceus compared to the Charizard, but I still actually really like Charizard V Max, especially when you don't necessarily have to damage it in the Mew matchup, which is kind of interesting, because then you're sat there at 330 hit points if you've powered it up with the Trinity Nova, and Claw Slash is already just knocking out Genesect, of course, so you can just be bossing and sitting here with a big guy and forcing them to take an awkward prize map themselves. Which is kind of cool. And also, even if they play Oricorio, you have Choice Belt that you can use the Claw Slash on. And of course, if you can, if your opponent is gusting around the Charizard, you can get to that 5 energy threshold, especially after Trinity Nova and the help of Magma Basin and Raihan and such. You can G-Max Wildfire through Mews. So again, it's an interesting prize race that you can represent here, where you have potential early Entei V. That's why you're seeing a high count of Rope, because you can try and force like Genesect into the active and just push, other things out of the way, which is kind of cool. So yeah, Fire's not been performing incredibly for me, but Arceus has been performing pretty well for me. So why don't we try and marry the two and make Fire that little bit more consistent? Because what I found in the format so far is that digging for Basin is really, really rough. So having some tutor for Basin with Starbirth might be the thing that we need to push Fire over the edge. And of course, Charizard does represent that high damage output. Claw Slash is actually a reasonable attack with so much Genesect around, so don't sleep on that either. Yeah, I think this is an interesting combination, and I initially saw it with a number of Charizard V-Stars. I'm not buying the V-Star so much, so I'm leaning more towards the V-Max, which is even more expensive to attack with, of course, but you can protect it behind Trinity Nova, which is a really big deal, I think. And the fact that just the 3-energy Claw Slash is relevant in probably the most important matchup, which is beating Mew, it's still very good just for 3-energy, so that's something worth bearing in mind. We're moving into Ice Rider now, going back to an Inteleon list and once again incorporating the Path of the Peaks. So compared to just like the straight Arceus, you have the higher damage output threshold here of Choice Belt Leon with a Max Lance discarding 2 energy. So you are weaving in an extra VMAX here, and it can make the prize map easier for the opponent if they knock out a Sobble early or whatnot. But your uptrade is that you have higher damage potential than the Arceus could provide. I personally think the list that I showed that was Inteleon plus Galarian Moltres is probably going to work out better than the Arceus Calyrex. But I do think Ice Rider is an avenue worth exploring. Again, just because you have Melanie, you have the potential to Power Edge, and you have the potential to Trinity Charge much more reliably than a lot of the other builds. Even though you are only playing 2 Turbo Energy, you can quite easily discard an energy and get a Melanie off as well. So yeah, a pretty interesting avenue, and I know a lot of people are interested in Ice Rider, so I've also done a secondary list here. This one is, again, stripping away the Intel package to go low to the ground just because of how powerful Crobat is in the new format with 4 Quick Ball, 4 Ultra Ball. Don't sleep on this new engine. We've tested it a lot, our friend group. We've had a couple of weekends now together playtesting, and myself and Jack have been playtesting on tabletop throughout the week. And Mew plus like just Bats and Luminions is powerful. It's really, really fast, and the format is so fast now that you have a turn 1 attacking option with Suicune very reliably here. When you have the 8 Ball Search outs to discard your energy, you have Mew helping you tutor out either Bucket or the Ball Search cards or the Switch outs, whichever you need. You have a decent amount of Water Energy in here. You have Luminion to get you Melanie, and it means you can represent that Blizzard Rondo for decent damage output here, especially with Zigzagoon Scoop Up Net and the 3 Choice Belt. That can be knocking out a huge number of Vs if the opponent is prone to going wide, which is again very likely for Mew, very likely for Single Strike, very likely for anything playing Inteleon. They basically can't play around it, and when you're playing 3 Escape Rope, this can be an easy 2-prize knockout for you, which I think is really awesome from this list specifically, because then that tempo moves in towards Ice Rider in that late game as well. So you are stripping away the Inteleon package, but not everything's guaranteed, and sometimes you're a little bit hit and hope with the help of like Melanie into Mew for certain combinations, but obviously you have the Starbirth for turn 2 at least. You have the Crobat pushing on turn 1, as well as potential supporter if you're the player going second. And yeah, it feels like you have a good amount of draw. You have late game beat stick potential with the Ice Rider combo with Leon, which is very cute. And at any point that you're able to Trinity Nova, it's usually after your initial Rondo, right? You're going for Rondo into Trinity Nova into Max Lance, which is usually your map here. If you are using that Trinity Nova, unlike most Melanie decks, you're able to get floating attachments onto Ice Riders, onto Suicunes, and that opens up the door for late game boss potential as well, which is such a big deal for these water decks, something that they really have lacked a lot of the time. So it's a great addition, and I think this is a really cool way to play Melanie builds as well. One final Melanie build is actually looking towards the current way that we play Suicune, and that's with Inteleon and Ludicolo. This time just having like a tech package of the Arceus, essentially knowing that now a level ball into an Incense can get you Starbirth, and Starbirth is essentially like getting a Shady Dealings, but you're not spending the rare candy on the big Inteleon. So because you're playing a high count of Capture Energy and obviously a decent amount of early game Ball Search, just getting an Arceus V down into play can be a really big deal. If the opponent is incentivized to like Gust the Arceus, for example, you can retain an attachment on a Suicune, or if it goes ignored, you can simply Starbirth into Melanie Double Turbo as a combo, or just Starbirth into, even some rare candy Ludicolo players can come off as quickly as turn 2, now that you have that Starbirth available. I think it allows you to have much more high roll potential with this deck. Even though it does usually leave multiple 2-prizes into play, it's a high hit point 2-prizer at least, so it does require a big combo, or for them to hit for weakness, for example, to be able to get an easy Gust 2-prize knockout on the Arceus, and it gives the Suicune higher hit points to get through, which I think is pretty cool. So it's similar to playing like the toughness scapes that we've previously played, but it's attached to a V-Star power that gets you only 2 cards, which is just pretty crazy. I'm actually still playing Big Charm in this list as well, just because of Arceus mirror matches, actually. You can Starbirth either attaching the Big Charm to the Suicune or to the V-Star, of course. But if you are Big Charming to Suicune, you go out of range of Arceus, which is really good for mirror match situations, actually. If you're the player going first, you can, Shady Deal or whatever into a Big Charm, attack with your Suicune, and it's a huge problem for you, especially for your opponent, especially if you just leave one prizes like Lotads and Sobbles on the board. It forces that 7-prize game, or for them to 2-shot a Suicune V, which is terrible in both instances. So I do think that's pretty nice. So yeah, this is kind of like less tempo Melanie, because you're not playing Crobat, you're not playing Luminion, but you're essentially a traditional Suicune Ludicolo that we've seen previously, now with the help of one choice belt at least for some damage modifier, and the fact that you can Starbirth to really have some pop-off turns as early as turn 2 is crazy, and I think Capture Energy might be prioritizing Arceus V in this instance. I feel like you could go even techier with this list and just have a 1-1 Arceus and 0 double turbo if you really want to, but like I was saying on the last slide, being able to Trinity Nova at any point in the game, even just to put 1 energy on a Suicune, is tremendous value, because then you're able to boss in the late game, and that's something that you currently really are struggling to do with the deck. Even though the deck plays like 2 boss, it only comes off if the opponent is, targeting down Sobbles or targeting down Lotads, because they're scared of your damage output. So yeah, being able to Trinity Nova to force that issue as well is another great thing for you. Into the lightning stuff then. Jolteon's in a really precarious spot, and I think it really does have to go back to the drawing board now that there is Manaphy around. Interestingly, a lot of my lists aren't playing Manaphy just yet. It's something I'm still going to be monitoring. Knowing that lots of 1 prizes may enter the meta thanks to Manaphy, I think already that's a bit of a hindrance for Jolteon, even if some of the 2 prize decks and 3 prize decks aren't running Manaphy. It's more of a risky play. But I do think if people are getting greedy on the Manaphy package, it can still be very powerful, especially with the damage output it represents after a Trinity Nova. Because if you choice belts the Arceus or the Jolteon, you can finish off 3 prize Pokemon pretty easily whilst doing 100 damage to set up either another 3 prizer or, set up 1 prize KO or whatever. So some pretty cool stuff here. I do think this deck probably needs Zigzagoon, honestly, but we are playing the ropes to try and make things happen. So you Trinity Nova into the rope rumble kind of play, which is kind of cool. But you could lean into the Jolteon even more so. This is really just a mop-up style play with the Jolteon. But we also have the Raichu V, and that also benefits greatly from the Trinity Nova, spreading energy around your V Pokemon. That's why you see a small Flaffy package in here as well for some big one-hit KO potential with the Raichu. Even if it is just a once-per-game kind of thing, it can be a big blow-up play, which is nice to threaten against the opponent and can make them again play differently, where they're avoiding certain Pokemon and being forced to like boss 1 energy Raichu or something. That can be a really big deal for you in terms of board state, and it can protect some of your other stuff in play. So yeah, pretty interesting to see where Jolteon lands. This is one that's more experimentational for me right now, and I haven't got many reps in, so I could see this list changing a little bit. Like I said, Zigzagoon, if you really want to have turn 2 Jolteon pressure that bit more, whereas right now I'm sort of having it waiting in the wings, doing a Trinity Nova and attaching 1 to like a Jolteon V or whatever, and seeing how the opponent reacts to it, and seeing if they actually just get a Manaphy down into play, and if they don't, sometimes you can get tremendous value. There's more Flaffy action with Arceus, and obviously being not only a consistency Pokemon, but also getting energy into play means that some people may try out Rayquaza VMAX. Putting 3 energy on a VMAX is excellent value, and it means that your opponent can't just easily, gust around your Flaffies and keep you off high damage output. You can really set up some big numbers with the Rayquaza. You also gain the Azopulse for additional draw potential as well, just getting you into the Starbirth potentially in those opening turns. So Rayquaza definitely wants a consistency boost. It definitely wants a turn 2 pressure play. Arceus provides both of those things, so that's really nice to see, and it could make Rayquaza great again. I haven't really, again, tested out Rayquaza too much, but I think in theory it ticks a lot of boxes that the deck's been looking for. Another one that's super interesting is Duraludon, and I know that this has been kicking off in Japan pretty nicely. Duraludon with that Skyscraper still is a huge headache for decks, and this tries to make your opponent go through as much meat as possible, essentially, to take their 6 prizes. Normally, you're going to try and make them go through either 2 Arceus and a Duraludon, or an Arceus and 2 Duraludons, ideally. And yeah, that's difficult to get through. You have the Big Charms, the Crystal Caves, and now Hyper Potion comes in, because it combines very nicely with the Double Turbo Energy. You can attach Double Turbo to Duraludon, then Hyper Potion to heal 120, and Crystal Cave on top of that. And sometimes, you know, that's a whole, you know, Max Miracle removed from a Mew, for example, and that can be a huge deal. So, yeah, very chunky Pokemon. You have some good acceleration now for the Duraludon. You have a turn 2 attacking play that Duraludon never reliably had, and it's in the form of a chunky 2-prizer, which is, again, really, really good for you. So Arceus helps out the consistency here for a deck that doesn't play much in that category, and can help you get your chonkers online, which is really cool. So yeah, you get to play some cool tech one-offs like the Choice Belt to help your damage output. You get to play Rope, you get to play Scrapper now as well, much more reliably, to get rid of big charms from opposing, like 2-prize Vs and Capes and that sort of thing. And even just scrapping off Choice Belts is essentially like that heal 30 that we're doing with the Crystal Cave in the first place, now that opposing decks will be belting up all over the place. So, very interesting deck. It seems to be doing well early on in the Japanese meta, and that Skyscraper ability is super annoying. Even though Arceus decks are playing lots of basic energy, they're still turbo energy reliant, and it means that they can, you know, you can wipe off some of their early game damage pretty easily with that Skyscraper if they're forced to attack into you, which is obviously very, very good. And some decks just straight up lose to the Skyscraper. And I think now with Hyper Potion, Mew's matchup does get worse into Duraludon than it has been previously, especially because they're usually going to try and have to use power tablets on the Arceus VSTAR, because again, it has high hit points for them to get through, and that's going to force them to churn their way through the deck, which is really good for you. So yeah, Duraludon, an annoying presence, and gets a lot better with Arceus as well. Similar to what I was saying with the Rayquaza VMAX, Shadow Rider really would love to see a turn 2 tempo attack option whilst also powering up energies, and Arceus does both of those things with Trinity Nova and has Starbirth on top to help you get even more Calyrex into play, and again just force that awkward prize map where they have to go through a chunky 2-prize and then hopefully 2 3-prize Pokemon, and by that time, hopefully, with Underworld Doors, Max Geist is in that higher damage output threshold. So yeah, pretty simple here. Arceus is a big improvement to Shadow Rider. My concern is there's probably going to be a lot of dark decks in the meta just because of Mew, and I do think that Galarian Moltres gets much better as a card in general because Ultra Ball and Choice Belt are big, big upgrades. So I think the meta position for Shadow Rider is questionable, but there's no doubt that Arceus makes this deck better, and Starbirth early is such a big deal because that gets you into Underworld Door, which gives you the consistency throughout the mid to late game. So again, that's a big help. Interestingly, Sylveon can take advantage of a colorless Pokemon as well. This is again putting Arceus more in that sort of tech slot and not even playing Double Turbo in this list, just using it for that Starbirth effectively to try and get you into, you know, either a Max Harmony early on, or get you into like a big G-Max Rapid Flow. Again, if Manaphy isn't being played, Urshifu can still get a ton of value. Urshi's typing is great into other Arceus mirror matches, which is good. You have the Moltres package in here again with E-Switch and Raihan to try and get some attackers out of nowhere. So you can still attack with the Arceus, it would just require some combos, but combos aren't difficult to come by thanks to Starbirth. It's always a great peace of mind option as well to be able to Dream Gift into Evo Incense, knowing that could become any 2 cards with a Starbirth play from your Sylveon V as well. So this gets Arceus into play turn 2 very, very reliably if you have prioritized it with your Ball Search on that opening turn. So that's a very cool option. I'm interested to see which avenue Sylveon goes down. Is it going to try and play the Leafeon V-Star, having that Leafeon V early game end of turn option for attachments, or is it going to go down the Arceus route where you gain the Starbirth? And I think, for me, Sylveon is questionable consistency-wise, and that's why it's not really made it higher up in the tier list. But now with Ultra Ball coming out and Starbirth at your disposal, Sylveon could be getting a lot more dangerous. So really, that's the decks that I wanted to look at in terms of the list that I've already come up with, but there's still a ton of options for Arceus. As you can see on the top, there's a ton of Stage 2 Pokemon that would love the option to go ahead and grab Incense Rare Candy, or the Pokemon itself plus Rare Candy, or even just getting some other support Pokemon out. There's nothing to say you can't play Arceus as a 1-1 line or a 2-2 line in these 1-prize decks, knowing that you can simply use Collapse Stadium to remove it from play later on, similar to how things like Mad Party might be using Crobat, and then you collapse them straight to the bin. You can do a similar thing with Arceus very, very nicely. Again, there's nothing wrong with playing like a 2-2 Arceus and like 2 of the double turbos, attacking with Trinity Nova. Even if you're not getting that acceleration around the board, it can just be an early pressure play for you to build up your stage 2s in the back, which I think is very interesting. So some stage 2 Pokemon might be loving this. Some one prize sort of like combo stage 1 decks might be loving this as well, just to get you into the game. And again, give you a turn 2 tempo play whilst you're doing other things, which I think is cool. And of course, there's more questionable VMAX, and even V Union Pokemon that we could be looking at for Arceus, and I'm not going to judge you for trying out any of them. Starbirth is great for making combos, it's great for powering up all sorts of expensive attackers, and it could even make those V Unions come off that little bit more consistently. I'm still not much of a believer of those cards, but you certainly can go for it. So my voice is absolutely dying, but we have talked about a lot of different deck lists here and really tried to give you a concise view of lots of different ways to play Arceus. This is only scratching the surface. I'm sure you've already thought of and built other ways that I haven't discussed, but from what I've seen so far, my checklist is going to be try and have a good Mew matchup, of course. Also try and have a decent mirror. That sort of leads me towards some of the more dark type Pokemon. Also, Zapdos looking like a great card coming into this new set and the new format where Ultra Ball gets value for Lumineon and Crobat and really turns the tide of how tempo goes. And I really wouldn't sleep on these new packages where I think the Celebrations Mew might become a good card. I mean, it's a far cry from Jirachi, no doubt, because it can't get supporter cards. But just getting you into those 8 ball search outs to get you Arceus into play, or to get you Crobat or Lumineon at the very least, I think that is going to be tremendous value. So I can foresee some 1 and 2 prize decks being part of the meta, where the opponent never wants to take that one prize, force them to find ropes, force them to find boss's orders, and become a headache for them all the time, because some decks just can't perform those sorts of plays with certain hands, and you just got to make them have it at times. So let me know what you guys think of Arceus. Also, let me know how you're enjoying the Legends of Arceus game. I think it's a ton of fun already, and we've only just started our adventures with it, so yeah, I'll hear your thoughts down below with Arceus. What was the favourite list that you saw today? What would you be changing with any of the lists? And what's your testing been like with the archetype so far? Is it going to overtake Mew, or is it just going to be in here as a challenger to Mew, which is still obviously ultra consistent and ultra powerful? I'll hear it all down below. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you with another video tomorrow. Cheers.